I've watched money for a long time. Long enough to notice something most people feel but can't quite name. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to live in a completely different financial reality, even though they don't look smarter, louder, or more exhausted than everyone else? They're not rushing, they're not panicking, and somehow, money doesn't seem to chase them, they let it come to them. I'm not talking about luck, or flashy success, or overnight stories. I'm talking about a quiet shift. The moment when money stops being something you pursue every morning and starts being something that works quietly in the background. I've seen that moment up close, and what surprised me wasn't how much richer people looked. It was how differently they behaved. The urgency faded, decisions slowed down. Fear didn't disappear, but it changed shape. There is a specific threshold where this happens. Most people think it's about income, or hustle, or discipline. It isn't. It's about crossing an invisible line, where the rules of money quietly change, and once you cross it, you never look at work, risk, or time the same way again. I didn't learn this from a book, and I didn't figure it out from one lucky win. I saw it by watching people move through money over time. I watched hardworking people earn more every year and still feel trapped. I watched quieter people, not necessarily the highest earners in the room, slowly gain something far more valuable than income control. What stood out wasn't how much they made, it was how their relationship with money changed. Some people stayed stuck in constant accumulation mode, always feeling behind no matter the number. Others reached a point where their decisions stopped revolving around survival. They weren't chasing the next dollar anymore. They were protecting something that was already working for them. That's when I realized money doesn't just grow in size, it changes roles. And the moment that role changes, the person on the other side changes too. That's the pattern most people miss, because they're too focused on speed instead of position. Most people grow up believing money works in a straight line. If you have $100,000, $200,000 must feel twice as good. $1 million must feel 10 times better. That assumption feels logical. And it's exactly why it's so dangerous. Money does not operate on a smooth curve. It moves in steps. There are long stretches where effort produces very little visible change, and then there are moments where the rules quietly flip. I've watched people grind for years, adding dollar after dollar, feeling no real relief. Then I've seen others cross a certain line and suddenly experience a shift that had nothing to do with lifestyle upgrades. They weren't living bigger. They were breathing easier. This is where most financial advice breaks down, because it treats wealth like a scoreboard instead of a system. Income, savings, discipline, those matter early, but eventually something else takes over. Capital starts behaving differently than effort ever could. And once that happens, the math stops feeling fair, because the game you're playing is no longer the same one you started with. This is the point where things become uncomfortable to hear, especially if you're still early in the journey. When money depends on you, every dollar is tied to your time, your energy, your focus. If you stop moving, the income stops too. That's the reality most people live in, and there's no shame in it. But there is a moment, quiet, almost invisible, where that dependency reverses. Your money no longer asks what you're doing today, it just keeps going. At small numbers, investment returns feel symbolic. $10,000 earning a modest annual return might buy you a nice dinner or two, helpful but irrelevant to your life. Even $50,000 doesn't change your dependence on work. But once invested capital reaches a certain scale, the conversation shifts. Now the returns can cover real expenses, real months, real choices. This is the first time capital begins to outperform labor for most people. And when that happens, you're no longer just a saver. You become a capital owner. That distinction sounds subtle, but it changes how you evaluate risk, effort, and opportunity from that point forward. This is where the internal change becomes impossible to ignore. When you're still accumulating, every dollar feels fragile. You're focused on growth, adding more, earning more, saving harder. Progress feels slow, and that slowness keeps your nervous system on edge. But once you reach the point where your invested capital is doing meaningful work, your mindset quietly flips. You stop asking, "How do I get more?" and start asking, How do I not lose what I've built? This isn't fear, it's responsibility. For the first time, you have something that can actually be damaged by bad decisions. Market swings feel different. Risk feels heavier. A 10% drop isn't just a number on a screen, it's months or even years of living expenses moving up and down without your permission. That's when people realize wealth doesn't eliminate anxiety, it replaces it with a more sophisticated version. And this is exactly why the strategies that help you build money often fail once the money is built. Accumulation rewards aggression, preservation demands restraint, and learning that distinction is one of the hardest psychological adjustments people ever make. This is the part most people don't understand until they live through it. Volatility feels more intense when the numbers get bigger. A 5 or 10% swing doesn't just bruise your ego anymore, it can represent tens of thousands of dollars moving in a matter of days. You can lose more in a rough week than many people earn in an entire year. That reality can be jarring. I've seen people reach this stage and start checking their accounts obsessively, refreshing apps as if watching the numbers could somehow control them. But here's the paradox. At the same time volatility feels scarier, it also becomes less threatening. Why? Because when you have substantial capital working for you, you're no longer one bad month away from collapse. You have cushion. You have time. You have options. Market downturns stop feeling like personal emergencies and start looking like temporary conditions. That's when fear slowly gives way to perspective. You're not trying to escape the storm, you're equipped to ride it. And that emotional shift changes how you react to risk in ways that compound over decades, not days. Once your investments can realistically cover a meaningful portion of your living expenses, work stops feeling like a lifeline and starts feeling like a decision. That distinction is subtle, but it's everything. You're no longer negotiating from fear. You're negotiating from stability. I'm not talking about quitting your job on the spot or disappearing from responsibility. I'm talking about the quiet power of knowing you don't have to tolerate environments that drain you. You can walk away from toxic situations. You can say no without panic. You can choose growth over short-term comfort because your survival isn't on the line. This is where people begin taking smarter risks, not reckless ones. Starting a business no longer feels like stepping off a cliff. Changing careers doesn't feel like financial suicide. The safety net doesn't remove risk, it reframes it. And that reframing leads to better decisions over time. People who aren't desperate don't rush. They don't chase every opportunity. They wait for the right ones. And that patience, more than intelligence or hustle, is what quietly multiplies outcomes. This is the shift that sneaks up on people. When you're building your first meaningful amount of money, everything is personal. Every dollar represents effort, sacrifice, and delayed gratification. Progress feels slow, so the focus stays narrow. But once your capital reaches a point where it can replace itself faster than you can spend it, your thinking stretches outward. Money stops being just a tool for your own comfort and starts feeling like something you're responsible for stewarding. You begin thinking in longer timelines. Not months, not even years, but decades. What happens to this wealth if you're not here to manage it every day? How does it support the people you care about without controlling their lives? How does it create stability instead of pressure? This isn't about obsession with inheritance or prestige. It's about continuity. You realize you've built something that can outlive your labor, and that realization changes how carefully you move, how patiently you plan, and how seriously you treat decisions that once felt small. This is where everything quietly settles. When you're still chasing security, your mind is always slightly ahead of your life. You're planning, bracing, preparing for what might go wrong. Even good moments feel temporary. But once your capital is strong enough to support you without constant supervision, something inside finally loosens. You stop living in defense mode. A $10,000 expense no longer feels catastrophic because you know your investments can replace it in a matter of months. Short-term setbacks stop triggering long-term fear. That's what real financial breathing room feels like. Not excitement, not luxury. Stability. You make decisions more slowly. You react less. You stop confusing urgency with importance. And here's the part most people miss. This calm doesn't make you passive, it makes you precise. When fear steps out of the way, clarity steps in. And clarity is what allows money, time, and life to finally move in the same direction instead of pulling against each other.